my name is Leah and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of August, and I'm especially excited for this because I read 3 new favorite books of all time in August. At least I'm pretty sure they're new favorites of all time. It's been 2 weeks since I read the last one of them, and even though it's been that amount of time, I'm still pretty sure that all 3 of these are new favorites. They're definitely new favorites of the year. I'm pretty sure they're new favorites of all time, so I'm really excited to talk about them. To start off, I wanted to do a little summary of the books that I read in August. I read 19 books this month. Of those 19 books, 9 books were audiobooks, 5 books were graphic novels, and I read 1 children's book. So if you do your math right, that means that of those 19 books, only 4 of them were physical or ebook reads. I wasn't feeling well and kind of fell into a reading slump where the only reading I was doing was audiobooks and the occasional graphic novel. When I go through these books, you can kind of tell where the slump hit because I read a couple physical books and then it was like audiobook, 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 graphic novel, audiobook, audiobook, audiobook. So you will be able to tell where the slump hit. The last book that I read this month was actually a physical book, and that kind of helped me get out of my reading slump because that book was so good. You'll have to excuse me if I'm looking down. I can't remember all of these numbers, so I am consulting my iPad. Of the non-graphic novels that I read, 2 were nonfiction, 4 were fantasy, 1 adult, 2 YA, and 1 book that I've seen categorized as both adult and YA fantasy. And I've read it and the main character is an adult, so I guess you would say that it's adult fantasy. It's not high fantasy and a bunch of the characters are children, and I think it's appropriate for like all ages, so I think you could classify it either as YA or adult, but I'm not sure what the original intention of it was. Then there were 5 contemporary, 2 adult, and 3 YA, 1 historical fiction that was YA, and this historical fiction has some fantasy elements, but I think it's primarily historical fiction, so I'm going to categorize it as that. And I think I categorized an earlier book in this series last month as historical fiction / fantasy, but I think moving forward I'm going to categorize it as historical fiction when I'm doing these like summaries because I want to categorize it as the genre that it is primarily, and though there are some fantastical elements, I'd say it focuses on the historical part of it, so I don't know. And then I read 1 science fiction. For my star ratings this month, I read 4 5-star books, 10 4-star books, 3 3-star books, and 2 books that I gave no rating because they were nonfiction books. I'd say that's a pretty good reading month. I'm pretty pleased, especially because I fell into such a slump, but I read 3 new favorite books of all time this month, which is so great. And I read so many audiobooks, which really got me reading more this month. The first book that I read this month was Let's Talk About Love by Claire Kahn, and this was a buddy read with Chanel. This is a YA contemporary with a black, bi, and ace main character. The main character, Alice, goes through a breakup with her girlfriend in the beginning of the book, but then she starts crushing on her new co-worker at the library, Takumi. Alice knows that she's ace at the beginning of the book, but the book kind of focuses on her figuring out more about her sexuality as she's discovering herself and also accepting herself. There are some other plot lines happening about school and her family and other friends that she has, but the majority of the book focuses on her asexuality and her crush on Takumi. I did want a bit more from the writing and the characters, but that didn't bother me as much as I think it would have in other books, because for me the ace rep was what was really important and what I focused on in the book. If it wasn't for the ace rep, I probably would have given this more of a 3-star, but the ace rep was so in-depth and explored and thought out, and I ended up giving the book 4 stars. There were a lot of quotes that really spoke to me. There were also a lot of quotes that both spoke to me and made me cry because they were things that either Alice thinks about herself or that other people have said to her disparagingly, and they're things that I definitely relate to or am afraid that people will say. So I found some things really powerful. I would say some of these quotes could be very hurtful to ace people reading it, even though the book is definitely condemning those things that are said. I think it still could be hurtful. So definitely if aphobia is something that will affect you, know that going in. I think it's a very important exploration of asexuality, but if that's something that might harm you, you should know that. The majority of those quotes are in the first chapter. That's when I really noticed it, and I think there's a couple in the second chapter as well, but there might also be some smaller ones later on in the book, but I'd say the ones that really made me cry were more in the first chapter. Something I want to talk about for this book is that I looked up a bunch of reviews after I read it, and I've seen ace reviewers saying that the ace rep in this book is really harmful, and for me, I don't agree with that. I don't want to speak against other ace reviewers or anything like that, and I think everyone's opinions are definitely valid. But some people said that this book had like harmful or stereotypical ace rep, but I personally didn't find it that way at all, and some ace people just really didn't identify with the character. But for me, I identified so closely with her, and there were so many things that she said and thought that really spoke to me. And I think it's very important for Own Voices reviewers to keep in mind that, like, especially for asexuality, that asexuality is a spectrum, and there are so many different asexual people with different experiences and different ways that they experience their own sexuality. And so if you're an ace person reading a book and you don't identify with the character, that doesn't necessarily mean that other ace people won't identify with the character, and one asexual character is not meant to represent the entire ace community. There are so many people in the ace community, and every one of those people experiences their own asexuality in a different way, and one character can't possibly represent the entirety of those experiences. I just got really discouraged seeing those reviews because while of course any asexual person's experience of reading this book is completely valid, I saw a lot of ace people replying to those comments and saying, "Oh, I'm ace, I had no idea that the rep was harmful, I'm not going to be reading this book." And this book meant so much to me, and I hate that an ace person might miss out on reading this book because someone said that. So I don't think that this book would necessarily speak to every ace person, but it's such an important book to have. I want to read more ace books. If you have any ace book recommendations, let me know. Leave that down in the comments, especially ace adult books. I know of a couple YA books, but I'm really looking to read some adult books, and especially I want to read some ace adult romances. So if you have read any or know of any, please let me know of those because that's something that I really, really want to read. The next thing that I read was a graphic novel called Aquacorn Cove by Katie O'Neill. Katie O'Neill also wrote the Tea Dragon Society, which I love, and Princess Ever After, which I love, and that's so cute and so sapphic. Please read all of Katie O'Neill's things. They just make me so happy. Katie O'Neill's art is adorable. Every one of her things that I have read, I have loved so, so much. They're all just so wholesome and so comforting and so good. Aquacorn Cove follows a girl named Lana, and she and her father return to a seaside town that they used to live in to help clean up after a storm. Lana ends up discovering a colony of these creatures called aquacorns, which are basically like magical seahorses. They're so cute. It's a cute and short read that also touches on grief and environmentalism, and I love it so much. And there's also a side FF romance that was so cute. I just loved this so much. It was such a quick and fun and cute and comforting read, and I gave it 4 stars. The next thing that I read was Dewdrop, which is a children's book and is also by Katie O'Neill. I used the Hoopla app through my library, and they had several of Katie O'Neill's things, so if you have Hoopla, definitely go check these out. Dewdrop was such a quick read because it's a children's book. Honestly, I think it took me like 10 minutes to read because it was so cute. So definitely, if you have a chance, go check this out because it'll take you almost no time at all, and it's so adorable. This picture book is about an axolotl. Is that how you say that word? It's like AXOLOTL. I should have looked up how to pronounce that word before I did this, but it's about that type of creature named Dewdrop. Dewdrop and his friends get ready to show off their skills to the pond in a little sports fair, and it's so adorable, and it follows them getting ready for this fair and them like doubting themselves, and then Dewdrop being like the cheerleader and encouraging everyone on, and it's so cute. It's just so adorable. It made me so happy. I gave this 4 stars, though You know, maybe it should be a 5-star because I don't really know how to rate children's books, but I gave this 4 stars. It's so cute. The next thing that I read was Heavy Vinyl Volume 1 by Casey Usdin with art by Nina Vakueva. This is Volume 1 of this adorable sapphic graphic novel. The main character, Chris, recently started working at a record store, and there's a lot of other girls that work there, including one that she has a really big crush on. And it's so adorable. This is so great and gay and has a fun cast of characters that kind of like solve some mysteries together and stuff. I love the art style. It was so fun and cool, and it takes place in the 90s, so there's some cool aesthetics with that. Speaking of the 90s, I looked up reviews for this. I don't always look up reviews after I read a book, but sometimes I do because I want to see what other people said about it. And I found a Goodreads review that complained about how this graphic novel was a sugar-coated story, and quote, "It's the 90s, but everyone seems so chill about the same-sex couples and there is no struggle at all," end quote. What? Why does everything have to be realistic and have struggles? Sometimes people just want a fun 90s sapphic graphic novel. Also, some people were still accepting in the 90s. Why do we have to hate fun things? Why do we have to have struggle? Why do we have to show hate in every graphic novel? So many graphic novels are just fun and cute, and that's what this was. I don't see why it should be necessary to show hatred. It makes me upset. But anyways, let's make some homophobes mad and read this adorable sapphic graphic novel. It's so cute. And I then read Volume 2 of Heavy Vinyl, which was also so good. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as Volume 1, but I still really enjoyed it. And I also gave this one 4 stars. I don't want to say anything else about the plot because it's kind of going off of Volume 1, but you should pick both of these up. They're so good and gay. The next thing that I read was The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This book. This is a fantasy that follows a man named Linus Baker, who is a co-worker at the department in charge of magical youth. Sorry, had to look that up to make sure I got it right. And they're also called Dykami, so I will say that in the future for short for them. He visits orphanages for children with magical abilities and kind of checks up on them, makes sure everything is running smoothly and that their powers are in control and everything, and he reports on them for Dykami. Near the beginning of the book, he's assigned to kind of go on a prolonged visit to an orphanage. Usually they're pretty short, but he's assigned to go to this orphanage, I think for a month, and report on them for Dykami. And this orphanage houses 6 children with magical abilities who are considered highly dangerous. And Dykami has some concerns about this orphanage and the children and the man who runs it, Arthur Parnassus. And Linus is a little worried about this because the children are so dangerous. This book is just so beautiful and lovely and adorable, and it's really just like pure joy in a book. It made me so happy. I cried so much reading this book, but it was like all happy, emotive tears. I don't know if I have ever cried that much at something that wasn't like sad crying. I listened to the audiobook of this. Yes, I have the physical. I bought this after I finished with a little bit of money that was left over from my birthday because I needed this physical book so bad because I love this book, and also the cover is beautiful. But I was listening to the audiobook, which also I highly recommend. The audiobook was wonderful. And I was literally like sobbing from happy tears for the last 30 minutes of the book. Like I was sobbing. Talking about this book right now is making me like start to tear up. That's how much I care about this book. This is also just such a great comfort read, and I really see myself revisiting it a lot in the future. I actually recently started a reread that I'm doing kind of slowly because I'm just kind of picking it up and reading a few pages whenever I feel like I need some comfort reading. It's just so good. It has such a good found family. Like, this is one of my favorite instances of the found family trope, and that's my favorite trope. Like, the found family in here, I'm literally about to cry right now just talking about this found family because they're so good. And it's gay, and it's so good. Just, please read this. If it wasn't obvious, I gave this 5 stars. If you have read this, please come, like, cry with me about it. And if you haven't read it, please go read it and then come talk to me about it because it's so good. There are literally tears in my eyes right now because I was talking about this book. I don't think you can see the tears because they haven't escaped my eyes, but trust me, they're there. The next thing that I read was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. This is a science fiction following a man named Arthur Dent who is teleported off of the Earth by his friend Ford Prefect right before the Earth is destroyed. They journey through space and have a lot of entertaining adventures together. This book was so funny. I wasn't expecting this book to be funny. I guess I didn't know how much of a humorous writer Douglas Adams is. I definitely want to read more of his work because this book just made me laugh. I listened to the audiobook and there were times I was literally laughing out loud listening to it. This was recommended to me by someone and I read this for a video that I have not finished yet. If I eventually finish that video, I will link it down in the description, but that's definitely not going to happen in the next week or two. I'm hoping to finish the other things I need to do for that video this month, so I think you will see it in October. The next book that I read was Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This follows Bryan Stevenson's career as a lawyer and his work with the Equal Justice Initiative, and with that, his experiences with the unfair and broken criminal justice system in America. This book discusses the criminal justice system and how it's connected to racial injustice in America, and it discusses several cases that were horrifically unfair and also several cases of innocent people put on death row. I didn't end up rating this book because I think I've mentioned before I don't often rate nonfiction, but I did really like the book and found it a very informative read, and I definitely want to watch the movie that was based on this book at some point soon. I do recommend this book, and I also enjoyed the audiobook, which is how I listened to it. The next thing that I read was another graphic novel, and that was Hawkeye Volume 1, My Life as a Weapon by Matt Fraction. This was a reread. I've read it before. This is a good Hawkeye series. If you want good Hawkeye content, not the Marvel movies, because that is not good Hawkeye content. That is not Hawkeye. I'm sorry, but that's not Hawkeye. Especially Endgame, that is not Hawkeye. And also, this graphic novel series includes love of my life, Kate Bishop. She's so great. Also, my friend Laurel introduced me to these comics and she loves Kate Bishop, and this was my introduction to Kate Bishop. I love her so much. Also, this Hawkeye has hearing aids and uses ASL, and they have him use ASL on page in the comics, like it's drawn out, which is really cool. I don't remember if that happens in the first volume, but if it doesn't, it definitely happens in later volumes of the series. So if you like Marvel, if you like the Avengers, read this for actual good Hawkeye content because movie Hawkeye is not my Hawkeye. Also, I just realized I'm wearing my Marvel shirt. And it's funny that that was Marvel because the next book that I have to talk about is DC, and that's Woman Warbinger by Leigh Bardugo. This is a YA Wonder Woman book where Diana rescues a girl named Alia after her boat gets wrecked near Themyscira. Diana finds out that Alia is a Warbringer, and Warbringers are this line of women whose existence end up bringing about more death and destruction on the world, kind of. Diana ends up leaving the island and finding herself needing to protect Alia from different people who are trying to come after her and get the Warbringer. I enjoyed this book and it was a really fun read. There were some fight scenes, especially where Diana was fighting, that were just so fun. But my one thing about this book is that it should have been sapphic. I cannot get over how sapphic this book should have been. There was a sapphic side character and I liked her, but there was so much chemistry between Diana and Alia. And I buddy read this with my friend Izza, and the whole time we were like, why isn't this book sapphic? There was so much chemistry between them. This could have been sapphic so easily, and it wasn't. And especially with Diana Prince as my bisexual queen, this book should have been sapphic. And also in some comics they have said that Diana has a past relationship with another woman, and they've confirmed that Diana is bisexual. Diana should have been bisexual. This book should have been sapphic. That's all I gotta say. Also, I did really like that sapphic side character, but I did have one small problem with something that ended up happening in relation to her later on in the book. I don't want to mention exactly what it is because it's kind of spoilery, but I did have one small problem with that. I gave this 4 stars and I also read it for an upcoming video. The next book that I read was Second Chance Summer by Morgan Madsen. This is a YA contemporary about a girl named Taylor who revisits the summer lake house that her family used to go to every summer and haven't been to in a while after her dad is diagnosed with cancer. She hasn't been to the lake or seen her former best friend or her first boyfriend, who both lived there, in years. The book focuses on Taylor, her relationship with these characters, her relationship with her family, and also her father's cancer. This was cute, but definitely if something that focuses on cancer is something that will affect you, know that, because this book does focus on it a bit. And I'll put trigger warnings for all these books in the description below. This was cute, but I wanted more from it and I don't really see myself reading it again, so I actually decided to unhaul this. I posted an unhaul a little while ago that included this, and I'm selling all of those books, so if you're interested in this or any of the books in my unhaul, let me know. The next thing that I read was another graphic novel called Over the Wall by Peter Wharton. This follows a girl who lives outside of a walled-off city where demons live. It's a rite of passage in her community for boys to go inside the city, but after her brother doesn't return from the city, she ends up running off and going into the city on her own. This was a fun and cute read, though I think I did want a little more of it, but I did enjoy it and I ended up giving it 3 stars. There is a sequel to it and I want to read that, but unfortunately my library doesn't have it, so I don't know when I'll be getting to that. The next thing that I read was Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. This was an audiobook reread and I read it for the Bibliophiles book club that I'm a co-host of, and this was our August book. I'm not going to say a lot about it because I read it for the first time pretty recently, but if you want to see more of my and other people's thoughts on it, I'll link our live show. Also, I read this for the first time in June and I filmed my May and June wrap up. But that is currently living on a memory card because I filmed it with my camera and I've been having computer issues, so I haven't been able to edit it. Meanwhile, I'm filming this and I filmed all my other videos that I've posted recently on my phone. So if I ever manage to edit and post my May and June wrap up, and yes, it's September, then I will link that too. And you can see more of my thoughts on it. The next thing that I read was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, which is an adult contemporary literary fiction book. This follows a black girl named Amira who is a babysitter for a little girl named Briar in a white family. This book really focuses on well-meaning white people who are actually really problematic. This mainly comes in the form of the mother of the child that Amira is babysitting. Her name is Alix Chamberlain. Alix is someone. She is a wild person. She does some very bad, very problematic things in this book, and there were times she did things and I was like, what? I cannot believe some of the stuff that she pulled in this book. She's horrible. I read this via audiobook and I really enjoyed the audiobook, and one thing I liked about this book is I thought all of the characters were really complex, even Alix, who is wild, but this book really focuses on a lot of different characters and I thought all the characters were complex and well developed, and I gave this 4 stars. The next thing that I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is an adult contemporary / historical fiction-ish. I decided to classify it as contemporary for the sake of my summary, but it's a bit of contemporary and historical fiction because it follows a movie star named Evelyn Hugo who tells her life story to this journalist named Monique. And some of her life story takes place years and years ago, so that's why I would classify this as like a historical fiction combo type thing. But then some of it's also modern, so I'm gonna say contemporary. This was so good. This was the 2nd book this month that I think is now going on my favorites of all time. I read the audiobook and I highly recommend the audiobook. It's so good. I think I want to re-listen to the audiobook sometime soon because it's just excellent. Evelyn is bisexual, and the sapphic in this book, the sapphic relationship, they're so good. They make me cry. This book made me cry so much, and I actually read this book for a video, the same video that I read Wonder Woman for. So when I get to posting that, you will get to see me crying over this book because I filmed myself crying over this book. I also took a bunch of photos of me crying over this book, so maybe I'll include those in this video. Evelyn is such a complex female character and I love her so much. This made me cry like 8 separate times, I think. Maybe it was 7. It would be funny if it was 7 because 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but I think it was 8 times. 5 stars, new favorite book. Please read it and cry with me about the sapphics. The next thing that I read was another audiobook, and that was The Red Scrolls of Magic by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. This is book 1 of The Eldest Curses, which is a Shadowhunter series that focuses on adventures with Alec and Magnus. I read this as audio and I enjoyed it, but I kind of wonder if I would have enjoyed it more if I read it physically. I'm not sure. My favorite part about this book was that Helen and Aline were in this, and I love my sapphics. So this is just the adventures of 4 queer characters because it's Alec and Magnus, and then later in the book Helen and Aline come in and they have adventures together, so it's just 4 queer characters running around. I love that. I ended up giving this 3 stars. The next thing that I read was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is a non-fiction, and the form of this is that it's a letter that Coates writes to his son. This book discusses race in America, talking about the nation's history and how Black bodies are constantly under threat in America. I listened to the audiobook of this and I really liked it. The one thing that I didn't like about this book was that there was a point in the book where the author used both the F and D slurs, and I understand that they were used for emphasis, but it was very jarring to hear that over audiobook. And the author does use the N-word, but he's Black, so that's okay, versus I don't believe that the author is gay, so I personally don't think that he should be using the F and D slurs even if it's for emphasis of something in the book. And even if he is gay, he is a man, so I don't think he should be using the D slur. But that was only at one point in the book, and I thought the rest of the book was good, and I especially recommend the audiobook because it was a really good audiobook. The next book that I read was Courting Darkness by Robin Lefevers, and I actually read this via audio. It was a reread. This is the first book in a spin-off duology of the His Fair Assassin series by Robin Lefevers, which I have been slowly making my way through a reread of in anticipation for the sequel of this book coming out. This focuses on 2 main characters. One of them is one of the main characters from the His Fair Assassin trilogy, and one of them is a new character named Genevieve. I don't want to say too much about this because it takes place after the end of the trilogy and I don't want to spoil anything for the end of the trilogy, but it's historical fiction with court intrigue and girls that were raised to be assassins, so that's fun. And this is the book that I said was historical fiction with also some fantasy elements, because in these books the girls that are trained to be assassins serve the god of death. I enjoy these books. I'm looking forward to reading the sequel, and I gave this 4 stars. Alright, the last book that I read this month, and possibly my new favorite book of the year. I feel like I can't compare it to House in the Cerulean Sea because I like them for different reasons, but this book is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. The only thing I knew going into this was that it was adult fantasy, and I had just heard the pitch, lesbian necromancers, and honestly, that should be enough of a pitch. Everyone should go pick up this book just based on lesbian necromancers. I mean, who doesn't want lesbian necromancers? So that should be enough of a pitch for you to go pick up that book. But I'm going to yell about this book for a little bit right now anyway because it's so good. This is adult fantasy, there's swords, there's necromancy, it's gay, it's so good. This book hooked me by chapter 2. By chapter 2, I was like, this is good. And around then, or a little bit later, was when I decided I'm pretty sure this is going to be a 5-star book. And when that happens to me, I'm always scared that something will happen later in the book and decrease my rating, but that never happened. The book somehow kept getting better. It was already a 5-star book, and then it just got better. More things happened that surprised me. The writing just kept consistently being good. It was just so good. Amazing plot, amazing characters, amazing writing. Gideon has such dry humor. She's very funny. Also, I buddy read this with my friend Izza, and we were both obsessed with this book. It's so good. And we're going to buddy read the sequel, Harrow, together. I'm so excited and so scared. The only critiques I have for this book, or things I want to mention, are that it's a little bit dense, but like adult fantasy tends to be dense and that doesn't bother me, but if you're someone who doesn't really like dense fantasy, you might not like this. It was also a little bit hard to keep track of the characters and they had complicated names, but there was a cast of characters listed in the beginning of the book, and I borrowed this from the library and I found this really helpful because I could flip back and read those. So reading this as an ebook might be a little bit harder because it's harder to flip back, or listening to this as an audiobook. I've actually already reread this via audio, but I already knew the characters, so it wasn't a problem for me. Also, I want to buy this book so badly, but first of all, I'm on a book buying ban because I can't buy any books right now, because I can't afford any books right now, because I'm saving up money to move out. Yes, I did technically break my book buying ban to buy Harrow, but in my defense, I had not spent any money on anything that was not bills or necessities in a couple of weeks, and my library didn't have Harrow. I finished Gideon, and if you've read this book, you know you finish Gideon, you need Harrow. You need Harrow immediately, and my library didn't have Harrow, so I had to buy it. It's so hard for me to wax poetic about this book without going into spoilers. Please read this book and talk to me about it. It's so good. If you have read this book, please talk to me about it. I love this book so much, and of course I gave it 5 stars. It's so good. It's so good. And those are all of the books that I read in the month of August. If you've read any of these and want to talk to me about them, please leave a comment down below, or if me talking about them convinced you to pick any of these books up, let me know. If you don't want to talk about the books, you can still leave a comment and maybe put a little emoji in the comments. Let's say a sword emoji because of Gideon, my love. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a like, and if you want to see more of my videos, you can hit the subscribe button. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you later. I can't say the word asexual. It's been 2 weeks since I read Aquacorn Cove by Katie McNeil. This is a science fiction How many times am I accidentally going to say following instead of following? The next thing that I read was a graphic Alia Carassus. Did I just say Carassus because I morphed Corallus and Arthur Parnassus? I think that's what just happened.